Now, the first thing Audubon noticed when he arrived here on Galveston Island was not a bunch of birds, but rather a bunch of Mexican prisoners working on Galveston Island. They were essentially being used as slave labor. Most of these prisoners on Galveston Island were captured at the Battle of San Jacinto and being used as forced labor here on the island to essentially build the city. Now, we'll come back to the Mexican army and the San Jacinto battle site a little bit later. John James Audubon was of course interested in birds and wildlife, but the first thing he mentions about Galveston Island was the mosquitoes, how large and ferocious the mosquitoes seemed to be. And next were the rattlesnakes. He mentions how many rattlesnakes there were on Galveston Island, and right after the rattlesnakes, he mentions the deer on the island, how there were quite a few clusters of deer roaming around. There were very few structures on Galveston Island. The only prominent structure at that time was around where Strand and 23rd Street intersect today. It was a small headquarters and customs house for the Texas Army. Audubon didn't really have a place to stay on the island, so he spent his evenings on the ship. Now, another interesting but very controversial thing that Audubon did while he was in Galveston and Texas was he had a man go up to the San Jacinto battleground and gather skulls of dead Mexican soldiers that had been killed at the Battle of San Jacinto just a year prior. Audubon collected these dead Mexican soldiers' skulls and mailed them to Pennsylvania to a doctor named Samuel Morton. I'll link a couple stories in the description of this episode. Very interesting, but very controversial, yet it is history. While avoiding the snakes, Audubon spent a couple of weeks here on Galveston Island collecting specimens. He notes that 1837 Galveston was in miserable condition. Very few structures, very few structure in the society here, mostly run by the army, and of course they pretty much had Mexican soldiers working as slaves. Audubon writes about the abundance of shrimp in Galveston Bay, and even goes on to describe one of the fish that was caught right on the east end of the island. As he was shrimping one day, he hears a commotion in the water. He and a few men go out and attempt to wrangle a fish. And I think the word wrangle is appropriate, as they got in the water and they cut the fish's tail, eventually pulling it out of the water. What they caught was a 12-foot sawfish right here in the shallow waters of Galveston Bay. To hear that story and then to think about how things have changed in this area, it's fascinating they were able to catch a fish that large right off the coastline.